The email landed in my inbox like a digital slap. Subject line: Urgent. HOA violation notice. Excessive water usage. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Another Tuesday, another complaint from the Northwood Estates Homeowners Association. Usually, it was about my slightly too long grass or the singular garden gnome that apparently disrupted neighborhood aesthetics. But excessive watering, that was a new one, even for Mrs. Albright, our HOA president, a woman whose stern glare could curdle milk at 20 paces. I knew exactly who was behind it. Brenda Albright. Or, as I affectionately called her, HOA Karen. She lived directly across the street, her pristine lawn a testament to either obsessive care or advanced neurosis. Her daily routine included a morning patrol of the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, eyeing every blade of grass and misplaced recycling bin. My yard, in its current state, must have been her personal Everest. My immediate reaction was a mix of annoyance and, if I'm being honest, a suppressed smirk. The sheer audacity of the complaint was almost comical. Excessive watering. Oh, if only she knew. This wasn't some accidental sprinkler malfunction or a leaky hose. This was calculated, precise, and entirely necessary. You see, Brenda Albright's excessive watering complaint wasn't just about a green lawn. It was about the carefully calibrated, legally compliant, state-of-the-art hydroponic cannabis farm that occupied nearly every square inch of my backyard. Every drip, every nutrient-rich flow was a part of a meticulously managed system designed to yield a legal, high-quality crop. My entire yard wasn't just a garden. It was a living, breathing, revenue-generating agricultural operation, a fact carefully documented and registered with the state. From the street, my property looked like any other suburban home in Northwood Estates. A 2-story house, a well-maintained, albeit verdant lawn, and a privacy fence. What Brenda didn't see, or couldn't comprehend, was the intricate network of pipes, reservoirs, and specialized plants thriving behind that fence, all requiring a substantial, consistent water supply. The very normalcy of my house was the perfect camouflage for my not-so-normal, perfectly legal enterprise. So, as I stared at the violation notice, a single question echoed in my mind. How could a legally registered farm be fined for doing what it needed to do to exist? How could the HOA, a bastion of suburban conformity, possibly contend with a truth stranger than fiction? And what in the world was I going to do about it? My journey into legal cannabis cultivation wasn't born out of illicit ambition or a desire for quick riches. It began, quite unexpectedly, with my grandmother, Esther. A fierce, independent woman who battled chronic pain for years, she found profound relief in medical cannabis after conventional treatments failed. Witnessing her transformation, from a woman tethered to pharmaceutical painkillers to one who could enjoy her garden again, was a revelation. It ignited in me a passion, not just for the plant itself, but for its potential to heal and provide solace. I was already a hobbyist gardener, fascinated by the intricate dance between soil, water, and sunlight. The idea of growing something so impactful, so misunderstood, captivated me. After Esther passed, leaving me a modest inheritance and a newfound purpose, I decided to shift my focus entirely. This wasn't just a business venture, it was a deeply personal mission, a way to honor her legacy and contribute to a burgeoning, legitimate industry. The initial challenges were daunting. The learning curve for cannabis cultivation, even for an experienced gardener, was steep. Understanding nutrient ratios, pH levels, light cycles, and humidity control was like learning a new language. My first few attempts were, to put it mildly, humbling failures. But each stunted plant, each pest infestation, taught me invaluable lessons. It was during this intense period of learning that I stumbled upon hydroponics. The idea of growing plants in water without soil felt futuristic, almost magical. More importantly, it offered unparalleled control over the growing environment, leading to higher yields and more consistent quality, crucial for a legitimate operation. After extensive research and a significant investment of both time and capital, I decided to convert my entire backyard into a state-of-the-art hydroponic system. The design was key, especially in a suburban neighborhood like Northwood Estates. My yard was already bordered by a tall, sturdy privacy fence, which was the first layer of discretion. Within that perimeter, I installed a series of deep water culture (DWC) systems, each neatly tucked into custom-built raised garden beds. These beds were designed with a dual purpose: to provide structural support for the plants and to elevate them just enough to facilitate easy maintenance, while simultaneously keeping the intricate plumbing and nutrient reservoirs hidden from casual view over the fence. The entire setup was covered by a discreet, automated retractable canopy that managed light exposure and weather protection, seamlessly blending into the backdrop when not fully deployed. From a distance, it appeared to be an unusually lush green garden, perhaps just overgrown. Maintaining this system required a precise and constant flow of water and nutrients. Unlike traditional soil-based gardening where water is absorbed and slowly evaporates, hydroponic systems rely on circulating water enriched with dissolved minerals directly to the plant roots. This constant circulation, while incredibly efficient, from a nutrient uptake perspective, meant that the system was always active, constantly pumping and recycling water. Evaporation, even in a closed system, is a factor, and the plants themselves transpire a significant amount of water. To keep the nutrient solution at optimal levels and to flush the system periodically to prevent salt buildup, a substantial volume of water was required daily. It wasn't excessive in the wasteful sense, it was foundational to the system's very existence. Each day, hundreds of gallons would pass through the roots of my plants, getting recycled, filtered, and replenished. From the outside, it might look like sprinklers were running constantly or that my water bill was astronomical. Both true, in a way, but it was all part of a highly efficient and necessary process. Before even breaking ground on the hydroponic farm, my absolute priority was navigating the intricate labyrinth of state and local laws. This wasn't a clandestine operation. I wanted everything above board, by the book. The process was arduous, demanding meticulous attention to detail and endless patience. First, I had to acquire a state cultivation license, which involved a comprehensive application, criminal background checks, and a detailed business plan outlining everything from security protocols to waste disposal. I registered with the state Department of Agriculture as a specialty crop producer. Then came the local zoning ordinances. While cannabis was legal in the state, local municipalities often had their own restrictions on cultivation, especially residential. I spent weeks poring over city council minutes, speaking with planners, and eventually securing a conditional use permit for agricultural activity on my residential property, contingent on strict adherence to privacy, odor control. Thankfully, modern strains and carbon filters handle this well, and security measures. I had to submit detailed blueprints of my proposed setup, demonstrating that it would be discreet and not infringe on neighbors' privacy or public view. The hoops felt more like an obstacle course, but I cleared every one, securing every permit, license, and registration required. Every single plant, every single drop of water was a part of a legally sanctioned operation. Even before the fine, I had noticed a subtle shift in the neighborhood's subtle social currents. Brenda Albright, ever the vigilant sentinel, had started, making more frequent detours past my house. Sometimes I'd catch her staring intently at my fence line, or perhaps just at the unusually vibrant green peeking over the top. She'd always offer a thin, tight-lipped smile if we made eye contact, but her gaze lingered a beat too long. There were the passive-aggressive comments disguised as pleasantries. "Your lawn is remarkably green, dear, even for this time of year." Or, "I hope you're mindful of water conservation," what with the local drought advisories? These weren't outright accusations, but subtle jabs, hints of a growing suspicion that she couldn't quite articulate. My initial response was usually a non-committal nod or a polite, "Just doing my part for a healthy ecosystem, Brenda." I knew. She was puzzled. My yard didn't have the typical signs of a massive garden. No visible rows of vegetables or fruit trees, just an impenetrable green wall. The unusual vibrancy of my lawn, coupled with the subtle hum of my pumps on quiet evenings, must have piqued her relentless curiosity. Receiving that excessive watering fine wasn't just an annoyance, it was an insult. It was a direct challenge to my legitimate enterprise, my hard-won legal standing, and, frankly, my intelligence. I had jumped through every bureaucratic hoop, spent countless hours ensuring compliance, and now this woman, armed with nothing but her judgmental gaze and an HOA rulebook, was attempting to undermine it all. There was no way I was going to let this slide. This wasn't just about a fine. It was about defending my right to operate my legal business, my home, and my peace of mind. The stakes had risen from a minor HOA dispute to a full-blown battle, and I was ready to fight. The HOA meeting was held in the cramped, fluorescent-lit clubhouse, a space usually reserved for potlucks and passive-aggressive book club gatherings. Tonight, however, it felt more like a kangaroo court, presided over by Brenda Albright. She sat at the head of a long folding table, flanked by Mr. Henderson, the perpetually nervous treasurer who fiddled with his glasses, and Mrs. Davison, the elderly secretary who seemed more interested in her knitting than community governance. I was the sole defendant, armed with my legal documents and a growing sense of incredulity. Brenda opened the proceedings with a stern, unblinking stare. "Mr. Davies," she began, her voice a clipped, practiced monotone. "We are here to discuss the persistent and egregious violation of HOA Bylaw 4.7, pertaining to excessive water usage within Northwood Estates. As you know, we are in a state where water conservation is paramount. Your recent water bills, which we are permitted to access for such purposes under our agreements, indicate an alarming and unsustainable consumption." She gestured to a printout of my bills, highlighted in bright yellow, as if they were a crime scene exhibit. "Mrs. Albright," I interjected calmly, deciding on a strategic, partial reveal, "I understand your concern for water conservation. However, the water usage you're observing is not excessive in the traditional sense, nor is it wasteful. My property is home to a specialized agricultural operation which, by its very nature, requires a consistent and controlled water supply. Every drop is recycled within a closed-loop system, ensuring minimal loss." Brenda's eyebrows, meticulously plucked into perpetual surprise, barely twitched. "An agricultural operation, Mr. Davies," she repeated, a hint of disdain creeping into her voice. "Are you suggesting you're running a farm in your backyard? This is Northwood Estates, not some rural commune. Our covenants clearly state that properties are for single-family residential use, not commercial enterprises that would disrupt the suburban tranquility." She then launched into a rigid recitation of clauses about lawn maintenance, landscaping, guidelines, and the prohibition of unconventional outdoor structures. Her tone was dismissive, as if my explanation was merely a flimsy excuse designed to circumvent the rules. Mr. Henderson coughed into his hand. "Perhaps, Mr. Davies, you could elaborate on this specialized agriculture?" he ventured, looking nervously at Brenda. "It's a form of hydroponic cultivation," I explained, trying to keep my tone even. "It allows for efficient, year-round growth of certain plants, optimized for specific conditions. The water isn't used up and drained away. It's continuously filtered, recirculated, and precisely delivered to the root systems. It's a very water-efficient method for what it produces." Brenda slammed her hand lightly on the table, the sound echoing in the small room. "Efficient or not, Mr. Davies, It is clearly in violation of the spirit of our community guidelines. Your fence is unusually high, your plants are unnaturally vibrant, and your water meter is spinning like a top. We have received numerous complaints." She paused, glancing meaningfully at an empty chair near the door, "from concerned residents about the visual impact and the unusual activity." She was obviously referring to herself. "Frankly," she continued, her voice rising slightly, "we suspect you are hiding something that is not permitted. Perhaps a nursery, or something else?" Her eyes narrowed, hinting at darker, unspoken suspicions. The subtext was clear. She thought I was either running an illegal business or doing something truly bizarre. The idea that it could be both legitimate and unconventional seemed to short-circuit her rule-bound brain. I felt the familiar wave of pressure, the subtle aggression of someone utterly convinced of their own righteousness. But beneath that, a flicker of comedic irony sparked within me. She was so close, yet so spectacularly far from the truth. In the days that followed, Brenda's obsession with my yard escalated from formal complaints to a full-blown surveillance operation. I'd catch glimpses of her from my kitchen window, standing on her porch with binoculars, sometimes even walking, down her driveway, seemingly retrieving mail, while openly craning her neck for a better view over my fence. Neighbors would occasionally mention Brenda's increasingly outlandish theories about my property, whispered over coffee or during dog walks. "Brenda thinks you're growing exotic mushrooms back there," one told me with a nervous laugh. Another mentioned, "She asked if I'd seen any unusual odors coming from your place. I told her it smelled like fresh-cut grass, but she just sniffed." It was clear she was campaigning against me, gathering anecdotal evidence from anyone who would listen. The mounting pressure was palpable. Another fine arrived, this one for failure to comply with prior violation notice. The stakes were undeniably rising, and Brenda's tenacity was not to be underestimated. She wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was a bulldog with a rulebook, and she was clearly enjoying her self-appointed role as neighborhood detective. But the more she pushed, the more I realized this wasn't just about my water bill anymore. This was about my right to conduct a legal business on my own property, about defending myself against an overzealous HOA and a relentless Karen. The time for subtle hints was over. It was time to prepare for a much larger, more public confrontation, where the truth, in all its hydroponic cannabis farm glory, would finally be laid bare. Okay, this is the pivotal moment. Let's unleash the truth and witness the chaos. Here's part 4, where the legal battle erupts and the hydroponic secret comes to light. The escalating fines and Brenda's increasingly unhinged surveillance made it clear I couldn't just brush off the HOA anymore. This wasn't a skirmish. It was a war, and I needed an arsenal. My first call was to a lawyer specializing in agricultural and, more specifically, cannabis law. I found him through a well-respected industry contact, Arthur Finch, a man in his late 50s with a calm demeanor, a sharp wit, and a reputation for dismantling bureaucratic absurdities. He listened patiently to my story, a faint smile playing on his lips as I recounted Brenda Albright's excessive watering crusade. "So, Mr. Davies," Finch said, leaning back in his leather chair, "you have all your state and local permits in order? Every T crossed, every I dotted?" "Absolutely," I confirmed, pushing a thick binder across his desk. "Licenses, conditional use permits, Department of Agriculture registration. It's all in there. I wanted zero ambiguity." Finch nodded, flipping through the documents. "Excellent. This isn't just about winning, then. It's about setting a precedent. HOA versus legally registered specialty crop. This is going to be fun." His confidence was a much-needed balm. The pivotal meeting was scheduled as a special HOA board hearing, called at Brenda Albright's insistence to resolve the Mr. Davies nuisance. This time, the small clubhouse was packed. Not just the usual board members, but a dozen or so curious neighbors drawn by the whispers and Brenda's public condemnations. She sat at the head of the table, radiating self-importance, a stack of my excessive water usage bills laid out before her like a prosecutor's evidence. "Mr. Davies," Brenda announced, her voice dripping with finality, "we have given you ample opportunity to explain your excessive water consumption and the nature of your agricultural operation. As you have failed to provide satisfactory answers, we are left with no choice but to levy further fines and consider escalating action, possibly involving liens on your property." Arthur Finch, seated beside me, calmly stood. "If I may, Mrs. Albright," he began, his voice surprisingly soft yet commanding, "Mr. Davies has, in fact, provided ample documentation to both the state and local authorities regarding his operation. Perhaps it is time for the HOA to be brought up to speed." He paused, letting the tension build. Then, with a practiced theatricality, he opened a sleek tablet, projecting an image onto the wall behind Brenda. It was a schematic diagram of my backyard, meticulously labeled nutrient reservoir, DWC troughs, recirculation pumps, root zones. Below it, a series of photographs showing lush, vibrant green plants thriving within my custom beds. "Mr. Davies's excessive watering," Finch continued, his voice now clearer, "is precisely calibrated to sustain his legally registered hydroponic cannabis farm." The effect was instantaneous and electrifying. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Mr. Henderson's glasses nearly slid off his nose. Mrs. Davison dropped her knitting, a ball of yarn rolling across the floor. But Brenda Albright's reaction was the most spectacular. Her face, usually a mask of rigid control, contorted through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Disbelief, then shock, then a profound, incandescent outrage. "A cannabis farm?" she shrieked, half rising from her chair. "In Northwood Estates? This is an outrage. It's illegal. It's marijuana." Finch held up a hand. "On the contrary, Mrs. Albright, as you can see from these documents," he said, gesturing to the screen where he now displayed copies of my state cultivation license and conditional use permit, "Mr. Davies's operation is entirely legal, fully licensed, and meticulously regulated by the State Department of Agriculture. He is a legitimate, compliant agricultural producer. And unlike a traditional farm, his hydroponic system is actually incredibly water efficient, recycling almost every drop. Your excessive watering complaint is, frankly, a misunderstanding of modern agricultural practices and a complete misapplication of HOA bylaws to a legally protected enterprise." The room buzzed with chatter. Neighbors leaned forward, whispering furiously. Some looked horrified, others utterly bewildered. A few, surprisingly, seemed to be suppressing smiles. I could see the wheels turning in their minds. That's why his yard was so green. That's why Brenda was so obsessed. The sheer audacity of it, the suburban facade hiding a legal cannabis farm, was a story almost too good to be true. And it was too good to stay contained. Within hours, a local news blog, Suburban Scoops, had picked up a tip from someone at the meeting. My money was on a disgruntled neighbor who liked a good drama, or perhaps even a junior board member tired of Brenda's antics. The headline blared, "HOA Karen fines neighbor for watering, unwittingly reveals legal pot farm." The story spread like wildfire, picked up by local news channels and quirky legal columns. My phone started buzzing with interview requests. Neighbors. Reactions were a spectrum of disbelief and delight. Some, like the elderly couple next door, were initially shocked but then seemed to find it amusingly scandalous. "Well, I never," Mrs. Peterson had said, "but it does explain why your tomatoes looked so vibrant last summer." Others, particularly younger families, found it hilarious and a refreshing jab at HOA authoritarianism. My mail slot started receiving Anonymous notes, "Good for you," and "Stick it to Brenda." The legal twist was a devastating blow to the HOA. Arthur Finch calmly presented case law, citing precedents where HOAs had overstepped their bounds in regulating legal agricultural operations. The legally registered status of my farm meant that, under state law, it was protected. The HOA's bylaws, while generally enforceable, could not supersede state statute, especially when it came to a legitimate business operating within the confines of its permits. Brenda Albright had painted herself into a corner, her rigid adherence to arbitrary rules leaving her utterly powerless against the undeniable force of the law. The fine for excessive watering wasn't just void, it was an embarrassing testament to her own ignorance and zealotry. The HOA was in a bind, with no legal leg left to stand on. The official verdict from the HOA's legal counsel arrived a week after the chaotic board meeting, a brief, terse email confirming what Arthur Finch had already assured me: the fine for excessive watering was formally rescinded. Not only that, but the HOA was forced to issue a public statement acknowledging my legitimate agricultural operation and committing to a review of their bylaws to ensure they aligned with state law. It was a complete and utter capitulation, a resounding victory for common sense and legal precedent. Brenda Albright, however, was not one to admit defeat gracefully. Her reaction was a masterclass in simmering resentment. She didn't erupt in a comical breakdown as I might have secretly hoped. Instead, she retreated into an even deeper well of passive aggression. Her morning patrols became less frequent, but when she did venture out, she'd conspicuously cross the street to avoid walking past my house, even if it meant adding 50 feet to her route. Her thin-lipped smile, if possible, grew even thinner. I'd catch her staring from her living room window, a silhouette of indignant rage, as if my thriving plants were a personal affront to her very existence. The silence from her was louder than any verbal outburst, a testament to her utter humiliation. She'd lost face, and in Northwood Estates, that was a fate worse than any fine. The community's reaction was, predictably, a mixed bag of bewildered amusement and newfound curiosity. The initial shock had given way to a kind of local legend status. Some neighbors, particularly the older generation, were still slightly scandalized but mostly fascinated. Mrs. Peterson, my direct neighbor, actually brought over a plate of cookies one afternoon, shyly asking, "So, are you perhaps hiring? My grandson is studying botany." Others, especially the younger families, thought it was absolutely hilarious. Kids would point at my house, whispering, "That's the weed farmhouse," with gleeful fascination. I even got a few anonymous notes in my mailbox, scrawled with "High five," "Neighbor," and "Brenda deserved it." There was a definite shift in the neighborhood dynamic. The suffocating uniformity Brenda had championed seemed to loosen, replaced by a subtle undercurrent of rebellious individuality. For me and my farm, the future suddenly looked brighter and certainly more public. The local media attention had unexpectedly turned me into a minor local celebrity. My phone continued to ring with inquiries, not just from fellow cultivators but from investors interested in expanding my operation, and even from curious homeowners wanting to know if they could grow a legal hydroponic garden. I started receiving invitations to speak at local horticulture clubs and even a regional cannabis conference. It was clear that my little backyard operation had become a symbol of legal cannabis's slow but steady integration into mainstream American life. I hadn't planned on becoming a local legend, nor did I intend to turn my home into a tourist attraction. But the incident with Brenda had forced me to step out of the shadows, and in doing so, I realized there was a real hunger for knowledge and understanding about legal cultivation. I began considering an expansion, perhaps leasing a larger, more commercial space where I could scale up operations and even offer workshops on sustainable hydroponics. My existing setup, while still discreet, now operated with an undeniable air of legitimacy, a testament to due diligence and unwavering adherence to the law. The HOA, now humbled, largely left me alone, perhaps too wary to challenge the weed whisperer of Northwood Estates again. Looking back, the whole absurd saga served as a powerful, albeit comical, reminder. It highlighted the sheer irony of a Karen trying to enforce arbitrary rules against a perfectly legitimate pioneering endeavor. It underscored the importance of knowing your rights and standing firm when challenged, especially when you've done everything by the book. But most importantly, it showed the humor in confronting rigid conformity with an unexpected truth. My backyard, once just a suburban patch of grass, had become a quiet revolution, proving that even in the most conventional settings, growth, of all kinds, finds a way.